Elements X and Y belong to groups 1 and 17 respectively of the periodic table. What will be the nature of the bond in the compound XY? Give two properties of X and Y. Now X belongs to group 1, so we just write that X belongs to group 1 and Y belongs to group 17. Now elements of group 1 are metals and 17 are non-metals. Now metals lose electrons, and if they lose electrons they will form positive ions. Non-metals gain electrons, and when they gain electrons they form negative ions. So the ion of X will be positive and the ion of Y will be negative. The bond between them will be an ionic bond. And if the bond is ionic, the properties will be that of an ionic compound. Ionic compounds conduct electricity. They conduct electricity in molten or aqueous state. They have high melting point and boiling point. To get more details into this, the X will lose one electron. It will have one valence electron. It will lose one electron, while Y will have 7 valence electron. It will gain one electron and become Y minus. And then the X positive, which I have already written, X positive and Y negative will attract one another by ionic bond. So the nature of the bond is ionic. Here the question where they ask nature of the bond. Is ionic, and we've given the two properties. Element X is in group 13 of the periodic table. What is the formula of its oxide? So X is in group 13. Group 13 means valence electrons 3. So it is a metal. If it is a metal, it will lose electrons. How many electrons will it lose? 3. Lose 3 electrons to make outermost orbit stable. Hence valency is plus 3. Now to find its oxide, you know X has valency plus 3, oxygen has valency minus 2. So it will be X2O3 will be its oxide. And the example of this is like aluminium. Aluminium is Al2O3. In the following diagram, for the first 3 periods of a periodic table, 5 elements have been represented by the letters A, B, C, D and E, which are not their chemical symbols. Select the letter which is a halogen. Now you know all halogens. Examples of halogens are like chlorine, bromine, iodine, and they all belong to group 17. So in this, whose group 17 is B. So B is a halogen. The next question. Select the element which represents a noble gas. Now noble gas are atoms which are stable. Stable, and they all belong to group 18. Group 18 are noble gas, and here we see E is in group 18. So E is a noble gas. What type of bond is formed between A and B? Third one. Now A is in group 14, and if it is in group 14, it is a non-metal. And if it is a non-metal, means it gains electrons. Let's take a look at B. Now B is in group 17. B, group 17. Group 17 is also non-metal and it will also gain electron. Now both gain electron. A gains electron and B also gains electron. That means there will be no transfer of electron. There will be a sharing of electrons because you have A and B both will share electrons. They will form a covalent bond. So the bond formed between them is a covalent bond. Unlike in the earlier case, if one loses electrons and the other one gains, then you get ionic bond. But between a non-metal and a non-metal, always a covalent bond is formed. So let's just, if we have a metal and we have a non-metal, the bond between them is always ionic. Because one loses, other one gains. We have positive, this is positive, here is negative. But if you have non-metal and a non-metal, now the bond between them is always covalent. And another thing you need to remember here is from group 1, 2, 3 are metals and group 13, not 3, 13. Then 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 are non-metals. Non-metals gain electrons. What type of bond is formed between C and B? So C, group 2 metal, and B, group 17 non-metal. So C is a metal, it loses electrons, and because it loses electrons, it forms a positive cation. Non-metal gain electrons, and because they gain electron, they form negative anion. So you have C, which will form positive, in fact it will form +2, and B, which is negative, it will form -1 because 17 valence electrons. That's not asked in this. So the bond between them, between positive and negative, the bond will be ionic. There will be transfer of electrons, no sharing of electrons. Transfer of electrons. C will lose, B will gain. Which element will form a divalent anion? Now, what do you mean by a divalent anion? Divalence means 2, anion is negative. So a divalent anion means is an ion with -2. Now why it has become negative? It is negative because it must have gained electron. And how many electrons would it have gained? It has gained 2 electrons. That's why it's become -2. Now who will gain 2 electrons? Is D. Now why will D gain 2 electrons? Because D is in group 16. Group 16 means valence electrons 6. If valence electron 6, it gains 2 to make outermost orbit stable. Gain 2 means it will form anion -2. The element X, Y, Z belong to groups 2, 14 and 16 respectively of the periodic table. Which two elements form covalent bond? So first we'll just examine each one. We have X, and X belongs to group 2. If it belongs to group 2, it is a metal. And remember, metals lose electrons, and on losing electrons they form positive ions. Now Y is group 14, and group 14 are non-metals. These also, remember, group 14 is like carbon, and they share electrons. They do not gain, do not lose, they share electrons. Then we have Z belongs to group 16. Group 16 non-metals. Non-metals gain electrons, and if they gain electrons, they will be negative ions. The question is, which two elements form covalent? Now covalent is formed by sharing electrons. Covalent bond is formed by sharing, and sharing will take place only between two non-metals, because both require electrons, so they share. Two non-metals always form a covalent bond. And who are the non-metals here? We have Y and Z, both are non-metals. So the bond between Y and Z, here we can say Y and Z are non-metals. So the bond between them is covalent. Which two elements form ionic bond? Now for the formation of ionic bond, there is no sharing, there is transfer of electron. One loses, the other one gains. Transfer of electrons. And ionic bonds always take place between a metal and a non-metal. Between metal and non-metal, there will be an ionic bond. Now who is a metal and a non-metal? X is a metal, Z is a non-metal. So between X is metal and Z non-metal. So the bond between, so they will both share, X and Z will share electron, will not share, will transfer electrons. And why do you say they transfer electrons? Because we have already seen what does X do. X loses electrons and forms positive, and Z gain electrons and forms negative. So between X and Y, X and Z, there will be an ionic bond. Now why not between X and Y? Now remember, Y belongs to group 14, like the example of carbon, and these always form covalent bond. They don't form ionic, covalent bond. An element X combines with oxygen to form an oxide XO. This oxide is electrically conducting. How many electrons would there be in the outermost shell of element X? Now first thing is we have XO, and we know oxygen is 2. So X also must be 2. That's why we get XO. So let's focus now only on X, the element X. Element X, valency, we know is +2. So if it's +2, it must be a metal. It must be giving out electrons, right? So if valency is +2, it must be in the valence electrons. It must be having valence electrons will be 2. If valence electrons is 2, it belongs to group 2. So that is A. It belongs to group 2. And that's B, the question B, where they're asking in A, how many valence electrons does it have? So this is B. And how many valence electrons it has? 2 valence electrons. C, write the formula of X with chlorine. So for C, now we know X is 2, chlorine is 1. So it will be XCl2 will be its chloride. So hope you have understood. Suppose we have X2O3, alright? What will be the valency? X would be 3, O would be 2. This is plus and this is minus, which means this would be a metal and this would be a non-metal. Always. Like here also we had XO. XO, so you could say X is 1 and O is 1. But we know O is 2. And X also has to be 2. That's why we got XO. So this is a metal, always metal because it is positive written first, and this is a non-metal. An element A has atomic number 6 and another element B has atomic number 17. Not atomic number, electron 17 in one neutral atom. So first we'll take up A. A, they said atomic number equal to 6. So electronic configuration equal to 4. So now let's write down what we know about it. So group will be, valence electrons is 4, right? Valence electron 4. So group will be 14, and remember it will be a non-metal. Now let's take up B. They said B, atomic number is 17. Although electrons are 17, we say atomic number is 17 because number of electrons equal to number of protons. So this is 17. Electronic configuration equal to 287. So valence electron 7. Hence group 17. Group 17 again non-metal. So both are non-metals. So in which groups of periodic table would you expect to find these elements? And that we have already answered. One is in group 14, A is in group 14 and B is in group 17. What type of bond is formed between A and B? Now both are, for B, both are non-metals. A non-metal and B also non-metal, and between two non-metals we always have a covalent bond. So between A and B we have a covalent bond. Now for the next, suggest a formula for the compound formed between A and B. So if you see, for A, the valency is 4, covalency 4. And for B, it has got 7 valence electrons. So the valency will be -1, just like chlorine. So the compound will have the formula AB4. The elements A, B, C, D belong to 1, 2, 14 and 17 respectively of the periodic table. Which of the following pairs of elements would produce covalence? So let us first mention now A, atomic group, they give us group, right? So they said group is 1, so it is a metal. Now we take B, they said group is 2, also metal. Then we have C, group 14. Group 14, non-metal. and then we have D, which is group 17. So again, non-metal. Now, which one will produce a covalent bond? The first is they are talking about A and B. A and D. Now, what is A? If you look up, A is a metal and D is a non-metal. So, not covalent bond. Here will be ionic bond. The bond between these two will be ionic because one metal, one non-metal. Now, for the second one, they said C and D. Now, C, look up and see non-metal, C. D also non-metal. So, between a non-metal, two non-metals, there is always a covalent bond. So, between C and D will be a covalent bond. Now, let's see in the others too. Now, we have the third one. Third one is A and B. Now, A metal and B also metal. Definitely not covalent. Then next, we take the fourth one up, B and C. B is a metal and C is a non-metal. So, the bond between them will be ionic, between a metal and a non-metal. And when it comes to A and C, now A we saw is a metal and C non-metal. Between metal and non-metal, always ionic bond. So, the correct option was only second. Between C and D, you will have a covalent bond because both are non-metals. An element X from group 2, this is okay, this is group 2, reacts with element Y from group 16 of the periodic table. What is the formula of its compound form? So, let us first see X belongs to group 2, and if group 2, it must be a metal, and therefore the valency must be having 2 valence electrons. Valence electrons 2. So, therefore, valency plus 2. It will lose the outermost 2 electrons because it is a metal. Now, Y belongs to group 16. 16 means non-metal. So, valence electrons here will be 6 and valency, now it is a non-metal, it will accept 2 electrons. So, valency minus 2. So, now to find the formula of its compound, X valency plus 2, Y valency minus 2. So, it will be X2, Y2 and we take common out XY. This is A. Formula of the compound formed is XY. Now, what kind of bond will they form? So, we have X, this is the B, X is a metal and Y is a non-metal. And the bond between a metal and a non-metal is always ionic. Because what will X do? X will lose 2 electrons and those 2 electrons that X has lost, Y will gain those 2 electrons. So, one will be positive, X will be plus 2 and Y will be minus 2 and the compound that is formed will be XY. A metal X is in the first group of the periodic table. What will be the formula of its oxide? So, X is in group 1. In group 1, that means its valency or valence electron equal to 1. Valency always plus 1 because group 1 are metals. So, X valency plus 1, oxide valency minus 2. So, it will be X2O will be formula of its oxide. An element A from group 14 of the periodic table combines with element B from group 16. What type of chemical bond is formed? So let's examine A. Now for A, the group 14 means valence electrons 4. So valency is 4. We call it covalency because remember 14 group is just like carbon. It has got 4, it shares 4 electrons. And then we have B. For B, it is, they said, group 16. So valence electrons 6. So valency 6 valence electron, it will accept. So valency is -2. So now when we want to find the compound, you have A is 4 and B is -2. So the compound will be A2B4, and when you take common out, it will be AB2. And what kind of bond will be formed between the two? We saw that A was a non-metal and B also non-metal. So both gain electrons, and since both gain electrons, the bond between them will be covalent. They will share the electrons. The covalent bond will be formed between them. An element X from group 2 of the periodic table reacts with an element Y from group 17 to form a compound. What is the nature of the compound so formed? We'll just examine. So you have X, which belongs to group 2. So if it belongs to group 2, remember it is a metal, and its valency, I'll straight go on now, its valency will be +2. And now Y belongs to group 17. 17 means it's a non-metal. It will gain electrons. And you know valence electrons are 7. For 17, valence electrons are 7. So valency for 17 is always -1. They gain 1 electron. So first question, what is the nature of the bond formed? So we have X is a metal and Y is a non-metal. So what bond do you expect between the two? The bond formed between them will be always ionic. There will be a transfer of electrons. So the bond between X and Y is ionic. Next, state whether the compound formed will conduct electricity or not. Now remember, this is an ionic compound. Ionic bond is formed, so the compound is ionic. And ionic compounds, they conduct electricity in aqueous and molten state. They do conduct electricity. Next question, give the formula of the compound form. So X, we saw the valency +2, Y valency -1. So the compound will be X, Y, 2. This will be the formula between these two elements. What is the valency of X? This should have asked in the beginning. We saw that X belongs to group 2. Group 2 means valence electrons 2, and these are metals, valency equal to +2. Next, how many electrons are there in the outermost shell of Y? So Y was group 17. So if group 17, that means valence electrons equal to 7. Valence electrons are the outermost electrons. So how many electrons in the outermost shell? 7 electrons in the outermost shell of Y. The following diagram shows a part of the periodic table containing first 3 periods in which 5 elements have been represented by the letters A, B, C, D and E, which are not their chemical symbols. Select the alkali. Now the first group is always called the alkali. So A and E are the alkali. A and D, they are alkali. And remember that group 1, alkali is group 1. Then next, which represents noble gases. This last group is of noble gases. Because remember that here we have the outermost electrons are 8, and because the 8 are outermost electrons, they are stable. So group 18 is noble gases, and C is in group 18. Then we have select the letter which represents a halogen. Halogen is 17 group. So group 17, halogen. So who is in halogen? It is element 6 is in halogen. Now what type of bond is formed between A and E? So we've got to see, is it metal or non-metal? A we see is A is right in the group 1. So A is in group 1. So A is a metal, and E is in group 17. So it is a non-metal. And now you know what kind of bond is formed between a metal and a non-metal. So the bond formed is ionic. Ionic bond. Next is, what type of bond is formed between D and E? So look at D. D belongs to group 1, and hence it is a metal. And E belongs to group 17, so again it is non-metal. So bond between D and E will be again ionic bond, because both are, no, because one is metal and the one is non-metal, so ionic bond. Elements A, B and C belong to 1, 14 and 17. So A belongs to group 1, hence it is a metal. Then we have B, group 14, so non-metal. And then C, group 17, non-metal. Now for the first question, which two elements form covalent? Now for covalent bond is always formed between two non-metals, because sharing non-metals, just write this again, covalent bond formed between two non-metals, because it is formed by sharing of electrons. Non-metals gain electrons. So who are the non-metals here? B is one non-metal and C is a non-metal. So B and C form covalent bond. Both will gain electrons. B has to gain electrons, C also has to gain electrons. So they share the electrons. Now who forms ionic bond? Now ionic bond is formed by transfer of electrons. An ionic bond is formed between a metal and a non-metal, because a metal will lose electrons and a non-metal will gain. So there is a transfer of electrons here. In ionic bond, there is a transfer of electrons. And who is a metal and a non-metal? A is a metal and C non-metal. So between A and C you'll get a ionic bond. Then you'll probably ask a question, why not between A and B? Because A is a metal and B is a non-metal. So why don't we get an ionic bond here? Remember, B is 14 group. And in 14 group, they only form covalent. They never form ionic. They mostly form covalent. So elements having group 14, they mostly form covalent. So they will not form this ionic bond with A. Find the neutral atom in the periodic table which has the same number of electrons at K positive. Now K is potassium, and in potassium the atomic number is 19. So the configuration of potassium is 2881. So potassium is unstable. So K potassium 2881. It will lose an electron, become 288. If you look up in the table, this is a configuration of argon. Argon has configuration 288, and potassium also we have seen ion of potassium, not potassium, ion of potassium has 288. Now let's take up for chlorine. Chlorine Cl, this is chlorine, and chlorine has atomic number 17. So configuration 287. So what does chlorine do? It accepts one electron because it has got 7 valence electrons and becomes chlorine -1. And this is 288. This was 287, accepted electron became 288. So chlorine negative is also 288, just like argon.